The deal is this. Tell you, when I was a kid, I read Dropper Anton Wilson, all this real. Tell you, when I was a kid, I read Dropper Anton Wilson, all this real. Dude, I'm pissed. Dude, I'm pissed. Come on. What?
And I'm Gary Butterfield.
And this is Days of Future Cast, the podcast where Gary and I talk about comic books. It's a first episode of what we're calling, or what I've been calling, season 2 of Days of Future Cast. So if you're listening to this for the first time, the previous 83 episodes were all about TV shows and movies in the Marvel Universe, mostly related to X-Men. And X-Men Evolution broke us. It was so bad that we retired from the scene. It ethered us, if you will. But now we are covering comic books, and we're going to start with the great new X-Men run from Grant Morrison. Gary, how you doing today, my man?
I'm all right. I've got a cough.
Uh-oh.
I'm going to hope not to cough on the recording.
I will. I'll get my marker key button ready to go.
Oh yeah. So speaking of X-Men Evolution, now that Disney Plus is a thing, I've seen a bunch of like listicles, like what to watch now that you have Disney Plus, and X-Men Evolution is showing up on like multiple ones of these lists.
Yep, can't wait.
And all these paragraphs about like what's good about it, and it's real weird. Like a bunch of them are like talking about how it has visual references from Buffy, and stuff. And I'm like, man, like that's not a reason to watch a show. You know, like
it looks like a bad version of this other thing that you like. Is a weird sell. The only one of those that I've seen is the AV Club article that I know our good friend Will Hughes from the Everything to Guppy podcast had contributed to, although I don't think he's the one that picked out X-Men Evolution. And that article was very much in that vein. Like it talked about the Buffy thing. It talked about how it was centered on the kids in high school, which sometimes the comics and the TV shows and the movies can kind of not do. And it had a few more points, but never once said that it was good. Once said it was like gave a point for like a reason to watch the show. Like it was a really weird paragraph.
Weird. It's a super weird. It's weird. I think that like some people are going to go back to it now that it's readily available and really dig it. Of course,
sure.
I think a good number of people are going to go back to it and wish that it had stayed quarantined in the past, where all of our childhood stuff should generally stay.
I had a friend DM me. They DM me like in the middle of the night. They have a weird schedule, but we DM each other vile shit on the internet, and a lot of it's X-Men related because that's something that we have in common. And they sent me a tweet that was literally just a small video of do you remember very early on in X-Men Evolution where Wolverine scents Sabretooth while he's fixing the bike and then just appears on a roof somewhere, and then Sabretooth's skull motorcycle with the giant flag, all of that happens, and they were like, I don't know what's happening here, this is terrible. And I'm like, oh yeah, let me tell you about the end of season 1. I have screenshots. Do you know how Scott Summers and Alex Summers are brothers? Let me tell you a story.
Let me tell you a story of two brothers. But we are luckily we're putting that behind us, at least for a while. And we're going to start with like as you mentioned, Grant Morrison's run on New X-Men. It's ostensibly Grant Morrison and Frank Whiteley, even though Frank Whiteley gets rotated out. And that happens a lot with Grant Morrison. Like he starts with an artist that cannot keep up a schedule, so they end up subbing people out, and that's probably the worst thing about the run.
Yes,
to me, is some inconsistent art.
Some of the times the person, and I haven't got there in my reread yet, but sometimes I in my memory I remember being like substantially worse and like not liking the art, but still like sticking with it because I love the story so much. Like I love the stuff that Grant Morrison was doing with all of these characters and things. I want to ask you, I feel bad. I've been an extremely busy boy lately, and I meant to research this for this podcast, and I just ran out of time. Do you know what the history of the X-Men were like leading into this? Do you know like even a general idea of what would have been happening? You can say no,
not really.
and I'll just
not really. So the most recent thing I'd read before this, and sorry for people listening that keep clearing my throat. I've got congested. is there was and it's referenced in this, but there was a run by Joe Casey that I read that kind of dealt with the X-Men being operating kind of as a corporation, where Banshee was kind of part of this like weird kind of proto-fascist X-Men kind of thing. I remember reading it. I don't think Joe Casey is always horrible. I've read some stuff by Joe Casey I liked, but this was not good.
Okay.
So I knew that was going on, and I knew that this whole thing is part of like a pretty big push that was happening at Marvel, specifically with the X brand. This came out around the same time that Ecstatics came out, the relaunch of X-Force with Peter Milligan, which I love dearly. It is them getting Chris Claremont back.
Okay.
Was a really big deal. He did a comic called Extreme X-Men, which crosses over with this book at some point, and is embarrassing.
Oh, okay.
It is an embarrassing fucking book. It is so boring. It is like one of the most boring, and every arc is like, here's villains who mind control the heroes. At some point, like lady characters becoming like subservient slaves. Like at some point I'm like, oh, this is definitely a kink. And we just didn't see it during the Phoenix stuff. But now that it's happening like twice a year in Extreme X-Men, good Lord.
Interesting. Okay.
So it was part of a big X push after the brand was a little bit stagnant. The most recent thing I read, as I mentioned, was that Joe Casey did.
So for me, I had pretty much left comic books, and I've told this story I think to you and to I don't know various podcasts, but like I had left comic books for a long time. Like just looked back, found girls, found video games. Like let's do that instead. Fuck comic books. When Autumn and I got married, a friend had gifted me Sandman. And I had never read Sandman. I know it's old as shit, but in like 2004, I started reading Sandman for the first time and got to going to our local comic book shop. And it kind of became our Saturday things. She would go to the barn. I would play video games. She would come home, take a shower. We'd go to the comic book shop, buy 3 or 4 trades, and then like go next door to the fish and chips place and like eat fish and chips and read comic books. Great day. And that is where I found New X-Men. Like I hadn't read any X-Men stuff ever, basically, like from like the 90s, essentially. And going directly from that into Grant Morrison's New X-Men was like, what the fuck has been going on? And it's a feeling that I got, I think I've talked about this before as well, but I've got the same kind of feeling watching the animated series as a kid because I didn't have that regular schedule. Like there was no streaming. Like if I was just lucky enough to catch it whenever Fox wanted to give it to me, like that's when I watched it. And seeing them out of order and like kind of weird just made me think that I was missing all of this other stuff. And so like it's those two memories are like kind of locked in my mind together, which is an interesting place I think to start with this new season of Days of Future Cast, just because it's just like we started the original season with the animated series.
Yeah,
so,
kind of there's already a status quo.
Yeah, exactly.
And this, this is issue 114 of a comic.
Exactly.
Yeah. That comic is the spin-off of another comic that is like on issue like 500 at this point, like in the early 400s, right? So like it is an old comic. And one of the things I really love about the run, kind of segueing into like its strengths in a general sense before we get into the nitty-gritty, is that I think that Grant Morrison is really deft at folding that stuff in and taking the most important part. So during this, like, we should probably talk about the cast. Maybe this will be like an intro episode where we kind of just talk about the run in general before we get into it.
Maybe so.
We'll have to feel this out. But one of my favorite, this is my favorite treatment of Cyclops in any media. Like this is the best Cyclops, I think. And one of the things I love about how Grant Morrison handles him is right before this, he had done a thing called the 12, which was Cyclops got taken over by Apocalypse. Apocalypse was looking for 12 very powerful mutants. They kind of merge into a thing. It was a very classic, I think it's like a Scott Lobdell story. Really, really kind of old school. And Grant Morrison takes that and he's like, what's the interesting thing about this? It's not, who those other 11 mutants were or the continuity kind of stuff or like what happened to Apocalypse or what that status quo was. It's what emotional effect does somebody with Scott Summers' history, somebody who is like super wound up very tight, who is like a Boy Scout, essentially. What does having, the most evil entity in the world in your head do to it?
Exactly.
And this whole run, we're going to be dealing with his fallout from that. And it has major repercussions, like things that are still felt today. Like the romance with Emma Frost is from that. Like the fact that those two ended up getting together. comes from this idea of like, what if the ultimate Boy Scout like kind of took this walk on a wild side, and I think that Grant Morrison is very good at taking what the like emotional core or the most interesting part of this continuity stuff is, and just really, really emphasizing that. Do we need, what is the most interesting thing about the Shi'ar? Is it their, decades of back politics and brothers and sisters betraying each other and the rules of becoming super guardians?
According to George R. Martin, yes.
Yeah, yes.
Read my new Shi'ar history book in stores now. Winds of Winter coming soon. Or is it Solar Winds of Winter? The Shi'ar crossover. Or is it like, hey, this is just an incredibly technologically advanced space race? Like, it's just a space empire. It doesn't really, the actual like individual details of it matter less than its kind of purpose. Like it's blocking, how that is useful and interesting to our characters that actually exist on Earth. And I feel like that's one of the reasons I like this book so much, is because I definitely feel like I'm missing some like valid context, but at the same time, I feel like the book has given me exactly the amount of context that I need to go forward. Like, there's references to, in the very beginning of the book, of like Beast having evolved further away from a human than he already was. But like, I don't need to know if that's a Mr. Sinister genetic plot, whatever. Like, I just need to know that he's changing and he's dealing with that. And
exactly,
and that's
we get him reacting to it.
Exactly.
Like, we don't.
As a character, as a person, right? Like, yes. as a mutant, as a superhero, as a doctor, as all these things, and as also just as a person, like, as we see his love life kind of crumble throughout this
totally
thing. And it makes
and people around him, and it gets weaponized against him by the villain, and it's holistic. Like, it's a holistic change. It's not arbitrary. It's not continuity wanking.
Exactly.
And all of the changes are like that, because one of the things, Grant Morrison is my favorite comics author, comic book writer. And one of the things that makes this run really remarkable, and it's one of the runs that I recommend to people, is just like, he knows how to do that. And it's crazy that in comics, that is not the standard. He's not the only comics writer who can do this, but like, these changes, Jean Grey's powers are coming back. She's like doing Phoenix stuff. How does she act as a person? How do her friends react to it? Those are really 101 level questions that I have definitely read comics, many comics, where not as much time would be spent with that, and it would not be as deftly handled.
And I feel like this is the time for comics, like this era of comics, especially like Marvel, the stuff that Vertigo was doing, like Brian Michael Bendis started a lot of this. Like, it really zoomed in on the personal lives of these heroes, and like that had been like archetypes up until this point. Like, Claremont got into some of this, but Claremont stuff is so over the top and wordy. It goes off into some crazy areas. Not that Grant Morrison doesn't do that, but like a very real moment with Jean or Beast or whomever in this. Or like at the end of the first issue when Xavier pulls the gun, like, that was so shocking, but so like, of course he has that, right? Like, of course that he's going to have that to protect himself. Like, just those logical conclusions to what a person that was in this situation that had these kind of powers would do, and that's what makes it so great. Like, that's where and it's all very fucking speedy. Like, it sets up a premise, and then it fucking runs with it. And then it takes a break for a little while. Like, and I haven't finished. I don't know how far you are. Like, I think I'm about 8 to 10 issues in that I read yesterday. I think I've read the first 2 arcs. It's just so fucking good. Like, it's just so great. And I think I've only gotten to the end like 2 or 3 times, and I'm so excited to get to the end of all of this stuff.
The big difference between the Grant Morrison's writing and this take, because the other thing that about this Grant Morrison run, something I've said for a long time, is that like, is clearly a fan of the X-Men, and each of these arcs kind of deals with a different aspect of the X-Men, right? Like, there's like the human mutant relations, there's the space stuff, there's the school stuff, there's the like Days of Future Past style future story, there's the Magneto like apocalypse story, there's all these kind of like archetypes it is. So it's clearly a fan. Grant Morrison read all of Claremont's stuff.
Yes.
And in some ways they're similar writers in that they both have really kind of intricate puzzle boxes of plots. Like, they're both very plotty, but it doesn't seem like it's a question. When you said it was really fast paced, pace is the big difference here. Like, one of Claremont's things is like, at the last page of this thing, there'll be somebody in shadow who says like, the X-Men have gotten more than they've bargained for. And then 2 years later, we reveal that's Mr. Sinister.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of how he does it. This is really plotty. All of these little pieces all come together to create like a complete story with a really amazing twist, which we'll get to. That's going to be a really fun moment because it's amazing, right? It's really good.
Mm-hmm.
All the groundwork is laid for that. All of the it's extremely plotty. It is a puzzle box. Like things in issue 1 come up in the last issue. Everything ties together, but it's just faster. It's like faster and quicker and more pleasant and less it's very confident. It's a confident mystery in the way that sometimes Claremont would feel to me like he was just, setting up a mystery with the idea that like, oh, someday down the road, I'll do the third Summers Brother.
Exactly.
And then it never actually happens.
Mm-hmm.
And it was going to be Adam X. Fuck off.
Or just, it's really easy as you're writing or creating something to put hooks into things and not actually have any of that fleshed out or built. And so just, oh, hey, I'm just going to drop this here. Lost is a good example. I'm going to drop this here. And then 3 years from now, if I need to, I can reach back and put a rope on that, put a plot rope on that and then bring it back. But I don't, when I'm writing it, I don't actually have that fully fleshed out or planned. And that's something that I feel like Grant Morrison in all of his work, like anything that he's writing, it feels like he has the story completely outlined in his head to some degree where he can make those kinds of hints or bring stuff in early or show previews or whatever that is, and it all works together. You can't put a lot of plot holes in it, and some of that maybe just because we're in the era of superheroes. We have fucking crazy powers. There's aliens. There's weird creatures. There's sentient sentinels. We're all over the fucking place. But I just fucking love it. The other thing that I think this series does better than a lot of X-Men, and has something in common with Astonishing X-Men that I like, that Whedon's run on that. It's extremely cool. In the very first page, we see our team of X-Men, Jean Grey and Wolverine and Cyclops and Emma Frost, and they're just little graphics. But the one that sticks out the most is Emma Frost, because it's just an up close of her chin, her the profile of her chin with a dope jacket that you can't see, but it's a dope jacket because it's Emma Frost. The neck pulled up, she just looks fucking cool. Jean Grey is using her mind to take apart a stopwatch or whatever, or an antique clock or something. It looks fucking cool.
All of those images so that's on the little title page, the credit sequence, and all of them do a bunch of things. Not only are they cool, but they show off the powers, so you don't have to do the little explanation, right? Beast, you can see that he is a beast, but you also see his glasses. There's the character. You see Wolverine's claws, there's the character, at least for this interpretation of him. He's very straightforward. Emma Frost is stylish and high class here. You're getting not only just the explanation of the aesthetic, but also of what the characters can kind of do. I used to have a big kind of collected edition of this, and ended up selling it in one of my apartment moves. But the back of it had Grant Morrison's pitch for this. And he, to our earlier point, he had the entire story laid out. The pitch in the back has parts that are redacted that are the spoiler. Mm-hmm. But it was clear that the entire thing was outlined from the start. 2, though, it's all about being cool. He wanted to get away from, he was listen, growing in the 70s and 60s, X-Men were cool. And it was true. Claremont's running the X-Men. This was an incredibly popular book in the 70s. It was huge. And it was what youth culture did. And he was now it is this weird thing that appeals to continuity wonks. It's appeals to the people who were kids then, but who are adults now. What if we tried to actually appeal to youth culture? So all of that kind of the redesign of the uniforms, the kind of just everyone's aesthetic is really, really that's intentional. That coolness that you're picking up on is part of the mission statement. We need to make the X-Men cool again. Get away from the dominatrix leather outfits from the movies. Get away from the big day glow costumes from the 90s. It's a school. They should have a uniform, but it should still be stylish. What if these were fashion leaders as well as rights leaders and kind of the intelligentsia.
And we should talk about that leads us right into the design of a lot of these characters, the redesign of a lot of our classic characters. And Frank Quietly has a lot to do with that, if not everything to do with that. And his art style, when I first started reading this, was really off-putting to me. I was used to those clean lines, and everybody looked kind of puffy and weird, and I don't even know, almost everybody was made out of cotton candy somehow. And I end up, and especially coming back to it, absolutely love it. And I end up falling in love with Frank Quietly and other books, and coming back to this and liking it a whole lot. But they just,
I think a good kind of thing for this season is like to talk about the artists as they pop up. So this episode, like, it'd be a good one to talk about kind of Frank Quitely in general, and then when other people fly in, maybe do our little tight five on what we think of the art in general.
Yeah. And I think he does most, if not all, of the covers of the series, but like, and all of them are really fucking amazing. But just the design of the characters, like the real thick, puffy X's that Beast and Jean and Scott have across their chest, the weird, super sexy, like Emma Frost, like inverted X, where she's only wearing clothes, like the naked X across her chest, right? Like that's like
flesh X.
But like it's like dope. It's like like highbrow fashion, like fucking. I don't know. Gautier could have designed that shit for her or whatever. I don't do not know anything about fashion. So
yeah, that's a musician.
Okay, cool. Oh yeah, he's the guy that's saying
someone I used to know.
No, wait, no, not that goat. I didn't say that dude. Am I pronouncing it wrong? Am I doing a Versace thing?
I don't know. Like I don't know enough to correct you. I know enough to know Gautier is a musician, but that's all I got.
I wasn't spelling it like that in my head. Okay, Gary.
The Frank Quitely is one of the, like, I understand how divisive like he is, and I think that the part that you were talking about, the initial resistance, is all in faces.
Gautier with the L.
Gautier. Okay, there we go.
Go ahead.
It's just faces. So like some of the faces, the thing that gets thrown around is like potato faces.
Mm-hmm.
I think that people, focusing on that puts you in danger of ignoring just having like industry standard, like, kind of blocking, like the way that scenes are composed in this. So like we can kind of, in the first issue, just as an example, right? I don't know how much we're going to get into it, but the first scene where like Cyclops and Wolverine are taking out a Sentinel, like just how much motion is in that, like the posture of Scott Summers, like how stiff that is. How you see everything about the characters and what's happening, like just in the frame through the composition.
Yep.
Like really, really dynamic. If you have not read it, or if anyone listening to this has not read it, I recommend everyone read We Three.
Oh man, We Three is so great.
It's one of the best comics of all time. And the actual, first of all, there's not a lot of human faces in it, if that turns you off of Frank Quitely's art. But it is just like astonishing. Like it is a cannonball of like just a really striking art. Just really, really incredible. So I think the big thing that he does that I think is really noteworthy, even if his faces aren't to your taste, are postures, are capturing scenes in unusual moments. Like a lot of times characters will be mid-air in a way that like is just really, to me, very appealing. I'll call it those examples, like when we run into them. But yeah, I think that his layout work is the most noteworthy thing.
Absolutely. And I think that I don't think that there's anything wrong with saying like, hey, I don't like this art.
Totally.
But to me, like I grew to love it over time, and like we'll follow that dude around. Like I just to see what he's doing nowadays. So
yeah. And I'm not saying it has to be anyone's taste. I'm just saying take a look at the layouts. Mm-hmm. If you're just like, he is a bad artist, like I imagine it's faces that you're mostly having a problem with, because I understand that, even though I've come to like them. You remind a lot of Steve Dillon, who's the guy who did Preacher. And,
yeah. Same kind of. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
His faces are very similar to each other, but they're also very good at expressions, being very expressive, and they're both really good at blocking. And those are skills that are like also skills to comic art. It's not just being able to make kind of pinups.
Yeah.
So, should we, what else do we have to say about the series in general for this intro issue, if we're going to do this short forums?
I don't really know. I think that's probably it for me. Again, just really like this series, looking forward to getting into it issue by issue. It does go some like mind bending places. It's also, I think, and I'm not a scholar on X-Men or even Marvel comics in general. Like I've read a lot of them, but I'm not going to even put myself out there as like some dude that knows everything about it, because like the internet is full of nerds. But this feels like a lot grosser of an X-Men superhero series than I'm used to. There's characters that throw up like in the first few pages. Like it feels a lot more visceral. There's like, especially with some of the mutants that we get into, and especially with the U-Men, like chopping off parts, and like it feels a lot more body horror than we usually see in the X-Men series, I think. And that's something that I think directly appeals to me. Like I like body horror in general. Like I like that stuff. So like this, this just is like a combination of things that I just really, really like, and didn't even know that you could do it. Like I remember reading this and going, I didn't know you could do that. Like you can just take this and that and put it together and make it better. Like that's crazy.
It's part of the whole thing being a little bit more mature, you know, and not mature in terms of like Marvel Knights, you know, Punisher cum shots, like more just more mature in terms of like just kind of a more kind of adult storytelling. We should discuss spoilers, like, because I imagine some people are going to read along with us, and I'm torn between not spoiling things and wanting to point out every single bit of clever foreshadowing that happens in this because there's so much of it.
Yeah, I really don't know where either, because I hate to be I despise like no spoiler policies. Like I don't like I hate to be the person that's like, well, spoiler. Like I hate saying the word spoiler out loud nowadays.
Yeah, we can stop saying it now.
But
give me the last time we say it.
But I think because I've read this before. I think most people aren't going to read along with the show. Like I think we've talked about, releasing these in a weekly fashion, and this being the intro, like we could just tell them, like, go after it, like read the whole fucking thing as much as you want to, and like let's just have the conversation. If you've read further than me, like I'm not going to care if you tell me stuff that happens in the 20th issue versus the first issue. Like that's just going to make me appreciate the 20th issue more. So
look forward to it.
So for me, let's just fucking talk about everything. Everything's on the table. But
if we're doing this once a week or once every 2 weeks, you will have plenty of time to get ahead.
Yeah.
Don't save it. Do it like Bonfireside Chat. Like read it. Go through the whole thing and then kind of check in with us. Or just know that we're gonna have spoilers in it.
And like just realize like a lot of this stuff that's quote unquote spoilers. There's only a couple of big twists, I think. And any of those, I don't think knowing the stuff that's going to happen with the villain is going to negatively affect your enjoyment of the story up to that. Like the face mask pool, like at the end of Scooby-Doo, isn't the reason that you watch Scooby-Doo, right? Like that's not the thing.
No. But I also, as somebody who was like reading the comics along with that, I would not want that spoiled for me because it was a pretty great moment.
Oh, maybe that could be different. Like if you're reading a trade, like I just kind of expect, So I don't know.
Yeah. So just read ahead. We're not going to spoil anything this issue or this episode of the podcast, but go ahead and just read the comic. It doesn't take too long. It's good. And we will be calling out foreshadowing. We won't be like discussing the ending in detail, but we are going to have spoilers. So, and we're not going to disclaim that every single episode. Just know going into it.
Yeah.
That this is a frank discussion of Frank Quitely. This is quite frank discussion of Frank Quitely and Grant Morrison's new X-Men. That's going to be our intro, and then we will next episode we're going to get into it issue by issue.
Yes,
starting with 114, the beginning of the E is for Extinction arc.
You should, if you're looking for this on Marvel Unlimited, you should know that they sort of everything by the literal first letter of a comic book. So don't go to X-Men, new, go to new X-Men, and there's two of them, and you want the one that's in 2001. But it'll start you off with X-Men 114, which is where you need to be.
Alternatively, you can just do Grant Morrison on there.
That's also true.
Yep, which will allow you to get the annual in there, which is kind of sequenced weird. And then also, while you're there, why not read Marvel Boy? And Marvel Boy's pretty good.
Sure, let's get into it. I also, before we end this, I just want to say thank you to everybody that, number one, recommended runs and stuff for us to cover. That's super appreciated.
Oh, yeah.
I've already gotten a lot of enjoyment out of those recommendations, so thank you. But number two, also, we're like, showed a lot of support for us, like abandoning X-Men Evolution and going into this. Like, even people that had good memories of Evolution were like, I could tell, like you guys were not having fun. Like, this sounds way more exciting. I can't wait to get back into comics with y'all. That's so gratifying to hear. It's so humbling. So just thank you to everyone that has reached out with those kind of comments.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we really appreciate you guys, your patience, and also your appreciation, or we appreciate your patience while we figure out the format exactly.
Yes,
because we're still figuring it out. So there might be some bugs to hammer out, but we're excited, and hopefully that comes through in the episodes, and we're excited that you're excited, and it's going to be really fun.
And if you want to support this show directly, patreon.com/Duckfeed.tv is the place to go. I think the way that this is going to work, and just, until the end of this recording session, it's not 100% nailed down, but I think I will probably put these up in an everything to Guppy fashion for patrons, like the week before they come out publicly. So if you want to get a whole grouping of a week or a session at once, like, that's the place to go to do that. And you can also like get cool other stuff, like access to the Slack channel and episodes of other podcasts early, and you can tell Gary and Cole to play stuff, which is always a fun time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we'll see you soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.